How the net closed around Jesus and his movement. Jesus had fought a verbal battle with the Pharisees during a synagogue sermon in Capernaum. The tension was high, and Jesus realized that he would not be able to proclaim his message freely for much longer. And indeed, the Jewish council took steps to sideline him. The events surrounding his outlawry followed in rapid succession, and here is a brief summary of the devious steps taken by the Jewish leaders. That night, at the end of the Sabbath, those Pharisees traveled angrily to Tiberias. They had requested an emergency meeting with Herod Antipas on behalf of the Sanhedrin. These scribes and Pharisees urged Herod to arrest Jesus. They tried to convince Herod that Jesus was inciting the common people to discord and even rebellion. However, Herod refused to take action against him, as his own intelligence indicated that Jesus posed no threat. Herod's advisors had given an accurate report of the events across the lake when the people tried to make Jesus king after the miraculous feeding of the 5,000. There was also a high-ranking official in Herod's court who had openly become a follower of Jesus. This man assured Herod that Jesus had no intention of getting involved in political matters. He described Jesus as a religious leader solely concerned with establishing a spiritual brotherhood. Herod had great trust in this official, and also in his own intelligence, so he refused to interfere in Jesus' activities. He did not want to become entangled in these intrigues against Jesus. He was aware of many instances of illness that were apparently healed by Jesus, and he considered him a prophet or a religious fanatic who could do relatively little harm. When the Jews threatened to report to Emperor Caesar that he was protecting a treacherous subject, Herod ordered them to leave his council chamber. The situation remained unchanged for a week, and during this time Jesus prepared his followers for the impending dispersion. During this week, Jesus held confidential discussions with his followers. Only the proven, trusted disciples were allowed to attend these meetings. At that time, there were only about 100 disciples who had the moral courage to withstand the opposition of the Pharisees and openly declare their loyalty to Jesus. He held meetings with this group. On the Friday of that week, official actions were taken by the leaders of the synagogue in Capernaum. The board decided that Jesus and his followers were no longer welcome in the house of God. These steps were taken under pressure from the Pharisees of Jerusalem. Jairus, a leader of the synagogue whose daughter Jesus had raised from a death-like sleep, resigned and openly sided with Jesus. The last meeting by the lakeside was held on the Sabbath afternoon of May 7th. Jesus spoke to no more than 150 people who had gathered there at that time. That Saturday evening marked a low point in the number of believers in the heavenly kingdom. From then on, there was a steady, slow, but healthier and more reliable growth in favorable feelings towards the heavenly kingdom. A new following was built up, better grounded in spiritual faith and true religious experience. On Sunday, May 8th, of the year 29, the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem issued a decree, declaring that all synagogues in Palestine were from now on closed for Jesus or his followers. This was unprecedented. The Sanhedrin had never taken such severe action against anyone before. Until then, every synagogue functioned as a decentralized independent community of believers, always under the authority of its own board. Only the synagogues in Jerusalem had been subject to the authority of the Sanhedrin. This disciplinary action by the Sanhedrin resulted in 5 of its members resigning. Immediately, 100 couriers were dispatched to deliver this decree to every synagogue in Galilee and Judea. Within 2 weeks, every synagogue had complied with this edict, except the synagogue in Hebron. The leaders of the synagogue in Hebron refused to recognize the Sanhedrin's right to exercise such authority over their congregation. This refusal to accept the decree from Jerusalem was based on their strong sense of independence. They wished to remain autonomous as a congregation. Unfortunately, It was not based on sympathy for Jesus and his heavenly kingdom. Shortly thereafter, the synagogue in Hebron was destroyed by fire. That same Sunday morning, Jesus announced a week of rest. He urged all his disciples to go home, to rest their troubled souls, and to encourage their loved ones. He said, "Go to your own homes, visit your family and friends, and meanwhile pray for the expansion of the kingdom." The second meeting between the authorities of Jerusalem and Herod Antipas was held on May 16. Both religious and political leaders from Jerusalem were present. The Jewish leaders informed Herod that practically all the synagogues in Galilee and Judea were closed to Jesus' teachings. New attempts were made to persuade Herod to arrest Jesus, but Herod refused to comply with their request. In the following days, members of the Sanhedrin lobbied, and after some behind-the-scenes politics, Herod agreed on May 18. He agreed to arrest Jesus on the grounds of Jewish religious laws. These charges could only be handled by the Jewish Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. He did set the following condition: since Jerusalem fell outside his jurisdiction, the Roman authorities of Judea also had to give their consent. Immediately after Herod's agreement, Pharisees throughout Galilee spread the lie that Herod had become hostile to Jesus and that he planned to destroy everyone who believed in his teachings. On Saturday evening, May 21, word arrived in Tiberias that the civil authorities in Jerusalem had no objections to the arrest of Jesus. Consequently, Herod signed the ordinance late that evening, shortly before midnight, authorizing the Sanhedrin's officers to arrest Jesus within Herod's jurisdiction. Strong pressure had been exerted on Herod from many sides before he agreed to issue this permit. He felt uneasy about it because he knew that Jesus could not expect a fair trial in Jerusalem. Now that the Sanhedrin had condemned Jesus' teachings and denied him access to all synagogues, unrest arose among the people of Capernaum. On that Saturday evening, a group of 50 prominent citizens gathered to discuss, what should they do with Jesus? He was the most well-known citizen of their town, and he still lived among them. This group was unaware of the political decision to arrest Jesus. They talked and debated until the early hours, but could not reach a consensus. There was much discussion about the doctrines Jesus preached, which upset the common people. Some of these citizens concluded that his teachings were impractical. They believed that everything would fall apart if everyone tried to live honestly according to his ideas. In their view, it was a noble ideal, but practically unworkable. People in later generations have said the same thing. Many intelligent, well-meaning people believe that modern civilization could not have been built on the teachings of Jesus. And they are partly right. The civilization as it is now balanced cannot stand if people widely adopt the message of the gospel. But these thinkers are trapped in the example of their own environment and cannot envision any other kind of civilization. What Jesus envisions breaks linear connections, as people autonomously pursue goodness by seeking the will of the Heavenly Father, basing their actions and decisions on love for all their fellow humans. One day, humanity will break free from the linear, centrally organized pattern and will learn to live from the spiritual lessons of your greatest teacher. So far, the world has never made a serious attempt to apply Jesus' teachings on a large scale. There have only been half-hearted attempts by various Christian movements.